Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics. Today, I am joined here by Christine Calvert. Christine, we met years and years and years ago at a Holotropic Breathwork retreat in Boulder, Colorado. I was really excited because a lot of people were saying great things about your facilitation, and I had a really great time. And the person I was with actually had a really wild premonition. I think even predicted her pregnancy. She didn't even know. She found out 2 days later, and that was like her whole vision. I don't know if I got to share that with you yet, but
No,
thank you
it's
for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me, Joe. So good to reconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So you've been around the Grof Transpersonal Training world for years, but before we get into that, let's talk about a little bit of your backstory. Like, how did you get into these altered states or holotropic states of consciousness type work?
Yeah, well, I want to say I came by it fairly honestly in the sense that my first sort of attempt, I guess, um, to experience expanded states was actually through, recreational drugs, which unfortunately led me to a pretty addictive relationship with substances. So um, that was my first introduction to this sort of attempt to use a substance. Now, as I look back at it in hindsight, to essentially experience some sense of wholeness or completeness. Um, I love what Carl Jung says about addiction, this sort of thirst for wholeness gone awry. So this was very much my early like teenage years, trying to find something to sort of temper the dissonance, the pain, the dis-ease that was happening inside of me. I have a pretty significant trauma background, so it made sense that I was looking for some ways to sort of, manage that inner experience. Um, when I was, 19 years old, I moved from Los Angeles to sort of make a shift from that and see if I could do something a little bit more useful for my healing. And somewhere around that time is when I found holotropic breathwork. I kind of went into therapy and was doing some other work that was certainly useful in laying some ground. But somewhere in that time, in the sort of early years of that transition, there was a man that was I was learning, meditation from, and he was in the sort of end of his training with Grof Transpersonal Training. And so he was gracious enough to introduce me to the work, and I'm so grateful because it just it busted open these doors that I had unbeknownst to me been attempting to sort of open every time I reached for a substance or whatever that thing was outside of myself. And so this was like the first time where I was asked to really go inward and use something as natural and organic as the breath to create and experience, um, who I am in all of my fullness. So it was a pretty radical experience for me the first time I found and experienced breath work. And, pretty much after that time, I was so intrigued and also quite terrified, to be honest. It was a really terrifying, like, experience to go, oh my gosh, like this is the gateway home to myself. But what that also meant was that I was not only just connecting to this sort of more transpersonal sense of who I was, this more sort of sacred self, but also to my humanity, to sort of all the shadowy aspects uh,
Mm,
that I had spent plenty of time running from. So,
right. Um, the stuff you said about Jung at the beginning, like this was kind of like a really substantial thread in a lot of the kind of transpersonal literature I was exposed to as I was coming up. And it gave me like a deep love for people struggling with
yeah.
substance. And because it's like, oh, you're also on this kind of very difficult mystical quest in a way, right?
Mm,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. And I, plenty of addiction in my background, personal and otherwise. So, like family and whatnot. So, it was just helpful to have that kind of nice touch point and to be a little softer around it, because everybody has such like horrible rhetoric around substance use disorders, and it's just it's hard. It's such a really hard scene, and you lived it yourself, right? So I don't need to tell you. Was there anybody in particular that was really helpful intellectually, maybe in your reading or training around this, like for a reframe?
Yeah, I mean, the person that comes to mind immediately is Tav Sparks, who was, one of the main teachers in the work, and he also, had an addiction background and came to the work, through that means, through met Jacqueline Small and Stan during this time of sort of being in recovery and working in the field of addiction. And Christina Grof, of course, was also part of that, and she had a lot of language for the addictive experience. And so I know for Tav, Christina Grof was a big influence and support in him kind of, also finding his own language for that process of healing. And so he was very instrumental to me. It was, the first time that I heard him talk about the holotropic paradigm, and then also sort of, addiction and recovery and the healing process relevant to that, was the first time that something actually made sense to me, and really gave context. Really, it was like finally there were arms wide enough to hold the experience that I felt I was having, but didn't have a lot of context for. And so, I guess to sort of synthesize it into a few words, it was really holding this sort of philosophy that Jung brought in so strongly around this, which was, understanding that this was really, as you said, a sort of mystical yearning, maybe like a celestial nostalgia that was happening in the interior world of, someone that was utilizing substances in this way. And, also just understanding that, we're rigged, we're wired to get our needs met. So when they're not being met legitimately, we're going to find ways to meet them illegitimately. And so, Tav had just a beautiful way of sort of bringing the language of that alive for me.
Mm-hmm.
And
great.
Yeah.
So you got me really excited around Psychia Institute and Jacqueline Small. I used to facilitate with somebody who went through Jacqueline's program, and it was super fun because it was like a slightly different lens.
Yeah.
But just so similar yet a little bit different, and that was always like kind of exciting for me. Did you ever get a chance to meet Jacqueline?
I did. Yeah, she was. I actually worked with her for a little while prior to ever going to GTT for training, and it was wonderful. I lived in Texas at the time, so I was in Austin, where she's from. I was actually a couple hours from there, so I'd drive a couple hours to Austin to go do breathwork with her, and it was really important to me because she was such a maternal figure. She really carries this sort of mother and sometimes very grandmother archetype. And has such an expression of love and support. So, I mean, this was a long time ago. This was like, almost 17 years ago. So it was when she was still facilitating and teaching in her work. And I'm very grateful for that. At some point, I wanted to sort of drink from the original well, and so hence I like taking the opportunity to go sit with Stan. But Jacqueline was a big part of my early journey.
And for those who don't know, Jacqueline was like a really early trainee and kind of like team member in the holotropic breathwork lineage. And I think she split pretty early. I just don't remember the years or anything like that. And I don't remember there being any animosity or anything. So I remember it being quite genial from all my memories. But it was cool to know. Like traditions do this, right? If we look at the yoga world, traditions are always doing that too.
Yeah.
Psychotherapy as well, no exception.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So from there, like when did you get involved in doing chemical dependence, like counseling. Is that what you called it earlier? Your license?
Hmm. Yeah, licensed as a chemical dependency counselor. Pretty early on, I feel like people who have been through, the experience of addiction often end up in that, in the field of supporting others. And it was a really natural transition for me to move into clinical work. And that happened early too. I was 20, 21 when I started doing counseling, and I'm so grateful for it. I really feel like it's what gave my experience, some context and some usefulness.
Mm, that's good. And I guess just for a sense of a timeline, when did you probably have your first Grof style breathwork experience? Maybe it sounds like with Jacqueline was your first, right?
Yeah, she was my first. Well, so the first time I did it was with a friend of mine who was just finishing the training, and that was in 2005, I want to say. And then pretty immediately found Jacqueline's work because that's what was accessible to me. And then a really beautiful teacher from Grof Transpersonal Training had come to Texas. Her name's Diane Haug, and I met her in 2006, I believe, maybe 2007. And so she was really my first, formal experience with, Grof Transpersonal Training facilitator. Um, and I was pretty hooked after that. So my first module in training was in New York with Stan and Jack Cornfield, and it
Omega
was
Institute.
yeah, yeah,
I might have been there. That was the Insight and Opening then at
yes,
Omega? When the hell was I there? It was really cold. I remember that.
it was chilly.
Um,
Yeah, it was the fall. I think it was in October or something.
right.
Uh-huh.
And they allowed a lot of folks to actually sleep in tents, which was awesome because that's how I could afford it. But it was
Yeah,
so cold at night. I felt bad for the people who weren't prepared, as prepared as I was.
yeah. I remember it was freezing, and I remember there was like, I don't know, 175 people there. So
It's
that was
massive.
my first like big group breath work, and I remember just like I was sitting first. And I remember just looking out at the room, which was just absolute pandemonium. It was
Hmm.
like the display of the full human experience.
Yes.
And I remember just crying because I was like, you know, both totally intrigued and excited, and just like finally I've arrived. And then I was also just incredibly terrified. Um, and I feel like that's an interesting and kind of truthful reflection of how, expanded state work is for a lot of people. It's like, okay, like there's this part of me that feels home, and like also maybe a little, you know, healthy resistance to like knowing what that also means for me, you know?
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. That was the first time, well, the only time I really got to see Stan work with somebody in a breathwork
Mm,
session with my partner in the breathwork session, and it was unbelievable.
that's
A
special.
level of competency I'll never have. So
Yeah.
it's just extraordinary to see, and what an opportunity. And I loved how you said that, like the totality of the human experience in one room, like all
Yeah.
the bliss, all the suffering, all the different shapes of positions people were putting their bodies in. It was something
Hmm.
else. And for whatever reason, like the way you kind of said, like excitement, but also like kind of scared. For whatever reason, this idea of an angel, like when the angels show themselves to people, it's like
Yeah.
it's not the human form. It's like this
Mm,
like grotesque, many thousand wings, many
yeah.
thousands of eyeballs type of deal, and it's exciting, but also pretty creepy. Just how
Yeah.
big things are out there, because we live in this
Yeah.
little small
It,
box, and the experience. Yeah. Any reaction to that? Sorry for the rant.
well, what you just said, yeah. I mean, I think it sort of blows open the very, yeah, small paradigm that we understand ourselves to be. And it's kind of like, oh, thank God, finally, finally there's some context for uh these inner experiences that maybe to some degree I've never shared with another being, if even really admitted um or gotten intimate with myself. And so it was so refreshing to sort of have this space where people said, "Come as you are," and they meant it. And this tenet that Stan birthed around, like, what if the symptom is not pathology, but in fact is the beginning of healing, and that there truly is an inner intelligence uh, that is always working, toward our healing and wholeness. And my favorite part about the breath work is that you really can't sort of bypass embodiment. Like, uh, you will come home to your body, whether you like it or not, and the interior
Which isn't
sort
always the
of
case with
corners.
psychedelics, just to get
Right.
explicit.
I guess that's why I say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is one thing I appreciated, that no matter how much I tried to keep the dissonance from some of these parts of myself that felt really challenging to lean into and to meet. Um, Breathwork is an opportunity to come into contact with these aspects, and I'll venture to say that the inner healer and the psyche is so brilliant in the way that it does that too. That it has it's like, okay, how do we get her attention? How do we sort of create this space soft enough where she'll come all the way in. And then I think the other aspect is the support, um, from the sitting, the sitters that are there to support you, as well as the facilitation. That no matter what goes on, um, I'll be met. I'll be met by someone outside of me, um, with presence. Which is like such a beautiful piece about this work is the presence. Because I think to really embrace and own my humanity and my shadow, I also think it's really relevant to have in the relational field, as I'm learning to do that, somebody that can do that for and with me in those moments that I can't. So I remember, being in some really dark places and just literally being held for hours, hours and hours and hours. And this really was such a beautiful bridge that I was able to eventually walk across, back home to myself, so that I could learn to sit, or sort of be my own best facilitator, if you will, because I had the template for that. And I think for a lot of us, we don't, coming into these spaces.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. When did you complete your certification from Grof Transpersonal Training?
Um, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember.
Or a
I
better way to
started,
put it, that might be easier, is when did you run your first breathwork workshop as the lead?
I'd say about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I took my time. I think I spent about 4.5 years in the training. I was really dedicated. I mean, I was also very young. So I think I was one of the youngest people to certify in the training. Um, so I was 20, yeah, I was 25. And, I took my time because I felt like in so many ways I was just getting to know myself. And then, I went back and started apprenticing, I think, within that year. But it was really important to me to have sort of experienced as much, have done as much of my own inner work as I could before I started showing up to facilitate.
Yeah, I would say, like, um, I have a little bit of a funny relation with permission. So
Mm,
I think I started like maybe 3-4 years into my experience, because I was doing workshops like quarterly, if not monthly, for a while.
uh-huh.
So like I was just kind of, I thought it was my path and like my career and all this fun
Yeah.
stuff. So I was just going at it, hitting it hard, and it was awesome to get that early experience. Though I realized that I'm pretty bold.
Yeah.
Maybe not the best move, but everything worked out okay as far as I know. Um,
Yeah.
which, note the phrasing, everybody, as far as you know, because your clients and patients might not come back and let you know. Um,
Yeah. It's true. I feel the same. As far as we know, we're not harming anybody, but Yeah, Tav used to say, thank goodness people are healing not because of us, but in spite of us, like we're sort of just
Right.
in the way, actually, a lot of the time.
Often.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Mhm.
the doing not doing kind of paradox here of like
Yeah.
what is the least and best I can do here.
Yeah.
Because the more you do, often the worse you're doing. And this is a really hard
It's,
thing for a lot of therapists to understand as it relates to
mm,
psychedelic psychotherapy. It's quite the paradox. So you have all this specialized training, but does CBT really work well under the influence of psilocybin? Like maybe not.
mhm.
Um, Works pretty well for what it is, but so you understand that context. So like,
Sure.
so I guess before we dig in and like start doing some discussion around like comparing breath work, psychedelics, whatever, um, can you describe this holotropic paradigm? I think we do it often enough on the show, but I'd like to hear it from somebody else.
Sure. Yeah. Um, it's one of those things for me that's it's so built in, um, that sometimes I have to like really pull the words out. And I feel like it gets a different expression every time, depending on where I'm at, because it's such a personal, intimate perspective for me. Well, just as I've already mentioned, some of the basic tenets of the work, that Stan was very clear about is, the inner healing wisdom. That this is about, um, this inner intelligence, what he terms so simply and beautifully the inner healer. That's that, and as facilitators, what essentially our job is to follow that inner wisdom, not to do or, um, intervene in a way that we think is best, but like our job is really just to sort of bow to and follow whatever it is that's happening, from that space, which is tricky. This is what requires us to do such a deep and uh, such a deep level of looking inward and continuing and being willing to continue to do our own work, because while we all get that, we go, yeah, 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 the inner healer. Like this is the integrity that it takes to stay true to that is pretty, is pretty deep, and to me
It's a
just
big leap of
requires,
faith sometime.
yeah,
Like I remember my biggest break at one point. Break might not be the right word. Initiation of the dark night of the soul
uh
the one that I identify as peak. It's
yeah,
like I somehow I had this little glimmer of hope and faith that it was going to end eventually, but it was brutal. And
mm,
like putting people through that is terrifying, but it's like kind of one of the better things you can help them through.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, and I think helping them through, like one of the greatest gifts we can do for someone is to trust that what is happening for them is exactly what is needing to come through for their healing, and that there's nothing that we necessarily need to do in order to manage that, but instead to, I remember when I was going through mine, I had a teacher that would just go, there is nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. And I just, to hear that would orient me back to this inner wisdom. And, it goes back to this sort of other tenet of stance, that which is like, we heal more homeopathically. So we heal through the expression, of symptoms rather than the suppression or management of them. Um, and so that means that whatever's arising, that if we as facilitators have sort of wide enough arms, um, the idea here is to say, like, that's it, make it bigger, like let that happen. And that's just not, culturally how we've learned to hold and manage the sort of interior system of energy and emotion. It's so deeply embedded to suppress and manage. So it's a really big deal. It was a really big deal to me when someone said, like, that's it, like, do that, let that happen, make that big. Um, so yeah, yeah. So I would say, in terms of the holotropic paradigm, one of the two main sort of, I think, tenets that hold it up are, one, this is about the inner healing intelligence of each individual, and two, that it's about healing through the amplification, if you will, and the expression of symptoms rather than the repression and management of them. And
What is my body trying to tell me?
yeah,
Yeah, totally. Like these things come up, and yeah, we try to make them big. And modern medicine says, well, if you're having a bad time in a psychedelic experience, we should make you have a good time.
right.
Or like, alleviate that suffering immediately, because any negative symptom is like the worst thing in the world, which I don't really understand this framing,
Yeah.
but it's like, sometimes, I guess, because we're too deep in this world where it's like, sometimes you have to go through it,
Yeah.
feel it to heal it. And if you suppress it, it's theoretically going to get worse.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what was missing, or what was missing for me was also, essentially Stan's cartography of consciousness, um, to then have a place to, well, I mean, I feel like this continues to expand, and one of the things he was so good at was saying, "Oh, this is what we understand about the perinatal right now," you know. So, he was able to create, language, through just thousands of sessions with, LSD and then later breath work, where he could, lay out this sort of this cosmology that had this huge open vastness to it that didn't limit what was possible for us to experience. And so, as we know, the transpersonal aspect, um, this ability to experience anything beyond the personal self or the egoic self. And then, one of the things that I feel like he really pioneered, um, especially relevant to expanded state work, was the perinatal um, dimension, understanding that, perhaps a lot of the feelings and experiences and patterns that we have in our everyday life actually can have some roots, not only in the transpersonal, but in the perinatal as well. So this time, you know, uh, uh, on or around the time of birth, essentially. And then also, just the biographical, obviously looking at this, the therapy world had this one down already, but he kind of, in my opinion, even widened it even more to look at, what's happened to us in this from birth to now. That's created some of these patterns. And so he had this really huge, um, cartography, and it allows us to really have a limitless exploration of our inner world. Um, what a gift,
Allowing for the vastness of human experience.
Mm.
Kind of one of the things I think stand for continuing that tradition. Like William James was there. There's a few others. What a fascinatingly huge thing the psyche is.
Yes. And I mean, even Stan is, to me, like probably the person on the planet that understands it the most, I guess, if we could qualify someone for that. And still, he says, we know very little about the psyche. And I think that's the humility it takes to be able to put something out into the world in the way that he did and does.
Right. It's extraordinary. Did you hear our interview we had with Stan and Brigitte recently?
Of course. Yeah,
cool.
It was wonderful.
Yeah, that was the first time we had him on. Really tough for me, given that I've loved him for so many years. I had to catch him post-stroke, but still, like really, really amazing. And for both Kyle and I.
Yeah, it was really cool to see that you guys got to do that.
Yeah. So, I've heard it said a number of times recently, and, Stan kind of titled his book, Psychology of the Future, to kind of antagonize mainstream psychology. But like, is he really decades ahead? Like, I get the sense, yes, in terms of like the model that portions of psychology, psychiatry need to move towards. But how do you relate to that? And we should point out that you are in training to be a naturopathic doctor as well, in Portland. But go with that. Do it.
Oh, my answer is an emphatic yes. I do think he's decades ahead. I think it's one of those things though where, he's brought forth something that any person that is engaged in the healing arts or in the healing field in some way, when they connect to it, whether they understand it or not, or even if there's resistance, um, there's a yearning for that, for something that's larger and more perhaps permissive and not about pathology. Because to me, constantly addressing pathology, or symptoms is exhausting. And I think we're all experiencing the sort of exhaustion of that, whether it's the way that we do it in our own way, with ourselves, or the way we do it as in the healing world, or on a larger scale. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now that's a reflection of this, of not sort of handling the root cause. And so I feel like, anytime somebody gets a hold of this material, there's, whether they understand it or not, or feel like they're aligned with it, that it does sort of like, open a little window of intrigue. And I think right behind that is really a longing to come home to, a deeper perspective and a deeper holding of the human, of our beingness. Because I can't imagine, that continuing to just treat symptoms and see everything through a pathological lens is really all that fulfilling. And it's also, we're just the doers in that world. And as much as I think our ego, wants that behind that is always the desire, to be a part of something that's actually truly healing, and to know that we've empowered somebody to heal themselves. This is one of the things I love so much about the holotropic paradigm, is that it is about radical self-empowerment. And so I think the healing field, is craving radical self-empowerment. Maybe we don't know that yet, um, but I see it. I see a lot of burnout. I see the way that even naturopathic medicine is taught. We're trying to legitimize the field, so we start to lean. There's an allopathic leaning, and I think, we're going to get tired of that really quickly. And there's a part of us that, like, I think collectively is like in the, so cocooned in the old thought, and it's become painful to stay there. And I think it's philosophies or perspectives like Stan's and others, and maybe what, psychedelics are attempting to do by bringing themselves back into Western space, the support of sort of breaking open this cocooning that I think has just become kind of a painful and constricting way to hold all this.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you're in the middle of this really interesting nexus where, you've got all this experience, depth of knowledge more than I would say, vast majority of the folks in the space today have, just because of at least your longevity in the space. And, it's got to be interesting watching how people are talking about this whole mushroom thing in Oregon, coming real soon. And, we just helped get religious inclusion, by the way, I think. Not 100%, but we really tilted the vote, I believe, which is amazing. I'm really excited about religious inclusion.
Yeah, that's
Keeps the
great.
cost really low. And do you have any real observations about how the process has gone? I know you're not like super duper engaged right now, but you have to be watching.
Yeah, I'm watching. Yeah, I'm watching. I mean, that's been my position. One of, it's been interesting to, one of the things I'm watching is that, I think one of the hard things to watch is seeing this sort of, I mean, we were talking about it earlier, this sort of frenetic energy around, people wanting so badly to be a part of this, which I understand. It's incredibly exciting. And I guess any sort of skepticism or resistance that I carry is just from the foundational understanding of my own experience, that for this to be successful, uh, we have to do our own work. And I don't know, and I don't quite understand, where the accountability is around that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It doesn't
and
seem like it's included. There is at least an experiential requirement, but experience isn't the same as like regular engagement with your inner process. So very different things. But yeah, like how would you require it, or how could you even propose that? I've been thinking about it. The easiest and cheapest way is like, have all of your students start a regular meditation and journaling practice, and maybe do some sort of like, I don't know, online support groups just to keep people activated for a longer period of time, maybe.
yeah.
I don't know. What do you have for thoughts around that?
Well, I mean, I feel like if any people are going to be holding space, one for, in session, like there's just it to me, it feels like it's just absolutely necessary for people to have done years of their own work, expanded state work in particular. I mean, I think meditation, some of the basic tenets are the first step. Like let's create a space where we can even hold these experiences. I think a lot of people, what I'm seeing happening, because I do a lot of my work is with integration, supporting people in integration and preparation, is that we're going into these experiences without a lot of preparation. Meaning, I don't know that we have a lot of the foundation to even hold some of the experiences that are going to come through with psychedelics. So there's that. So people are coming out with just really dysregulated, and there's a sort of a lot of um, managing around that. And then, I think what I've seen even in the breath work for so many years is that there's always a little, um, I think we minimize time around integration and the importance of that aspect of the work. And so I think we sort of talk a lot, like preparation, session, integration, and how important this is. But I think we're still learning in the West, like what this really means, especially to the Western psyche, that is so oriented outside of ourselves and so oriented to doing. And at least when I came into this space, I didn't have a lot of resources to handle the sort of potency of the experiences that were about to come through for me. So it was paramount. It was absolutely critical to have had, some sort of practice to, already in place, so that I could hold these things when they came through, and to have a support system. And then I think just in general, continuing to create spaces for people to come and to continue to be. I mean, I think we have to stop being afraid, um, of to just be vulnerable. We have to stop being afraid of our humanity. As facilitators, as practitioners, as space holders, as participants, in medicine and breath work. Like this is what we have to, I think,
So it's
really
okay
be
to act like a
willing
human.
to
I don't have
share.
to act like I'm a saint or anything.
Yeah, I mean, when we're willing to sort of knock ourselves off the saint pedestal as facilitators and space holders, I think then we might be able to hold this. That's not to say that there's there's an inherent power dynamic in this. Somebody that's done their work has learned to facilitate. They're holding space, but I just mean within themselves, not holding them. In that regard. Like the reality is, when I'm sitting with somebody, I have absolutely no idea what they need. I have absolutely no idea what's in store for them. What I know is that their inner healer knows exactly what they do need, and my job is to honor that. And that's a lot of dying in a 3-hour session to myself. When I'm sitting with somebody and there's a lot of things happening, and I think I have some ideas of what they need or what they might be experiencing. My job in that moment is to die to myself, and to surrender and reorient to their inner wisdom, which means that I will have had to do that over and over in my own work to be able to do that sitting with someone else. Maybe Joe, maybe some people get it really quick. Like maybe some people only need a couple months of deep work. I don't know. For me, it took and continues to take years, and I don't feel like I'll ever really arrive at some place. Like my job as a person in sitting with people in expanded states is to absolutely be willing to commit to myself to continue to do my own work, period.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, it'll be interesting to see. I feel like plants and psychedelics have their own agenda here as well. I feel like in some way they're like, okay, how do we get this like collective chaos? How do we settle this, and how do we bring them home to themselves? I feel like there's an agenda here too. We're not really in charge of it. So.
And that's something we don't really talk about on the show. It's Terrence McKenna had some really fun phrasings around this. It's like, okay, you're still a monkey with sharp teeth, and you've got a lot of learning left to do. And being at the brink of, so many different crises for so many years, like that should be enough for us to kind of understand how out of control this human project is. Drunk on oil.
That's right. Which is the beauty of it too, And I think when we get there to the admittance of that is when we get to enjoy it a little too. It's like, oh, I see. Like how poignant is the human experience, instead of trying to hide it and tuck it away. And
Now, I was on a webinar the other day with the Canadian Psychedelic Association talking about filling the practitioner gap, because everybody wants to do this very quickly. And I made sure to point out that the Grof training programs, at the very least 2 years, and there's not even drugs in the mix.
Right.
And that's,
right.
We have this really cool 12-month program, but it's, really it should be years. Yeah. I hate to say that out loud, everybody, but, just know that there's a lot that needs to go on, and it's something that can't be rushed. And it's hard to even define, but you did a great job. Like that's probably one of the better attempts I've heard. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Your training program looks excellent, by the way.
Thank you.
Looked at
Super
it.
psyched.
It looks really, really incredible.
You
have some great people joining you. Yeah.
It's like we had to try to just vision what is the best thing we can come up with. If we really thought that, it would have been like an 8-year program, but we said, let's start with something a little more practical.
Yeah.
But yeah, like my idea is we want to really reduce the amount of harm that's happening out there.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty of psychedelic harm in the world. Largely it's good. And even the harm can be learning catalysts, everybody. So, it's okay. You just have to stick with it, keep working the process. But yeah, like what is optimal and ideal and what's necessary? And, the less news stories that are negative out there means better, more safe psychedelics sooner. Right?
Yeah.
Drugs generally, I'm kind of one of these anti-prohibitionists that wants nobody to have to die from an OD. It's kind of a radical position in psychedelics. But it's kind of my position. Yeah. So, I don't know, what other things in this whole psychedelic and kind of holotropic world have you been most interested in lately?
Well, I would say, certainly it's been interesting to watch, the psychedelic kind of renaissance that we're in now because, a couple years ago or a few years ago, so many less people knew what holotropic breathwork was, first of all. So it's been fun and interesting to watch, even just the knowledge of holotropic and Stan's work spread as a result of psychedelics sort of um, rebirthing themselves into our space. And so I'm appreciating, his model more than ever because I hope it continues to be a really good template and that people utilize it as a way to create really safe space. And I love what you said about, a second ago. It's like I think the reality is like we're gonna screw up. I mean, we're all gonna screw this up a little bit, you know, with our human hands. We're excited, um, and we're just that, human. And so I think the importance is perhaps not on the perfection, but the willingness to have, uh, and a friend of mine said this actually, accountability and repair. Um, so what does it look like when I'm aware that I'm in space and I'm not my best self, or I'm dealing with something um, that's very live for me, and I'm being triggered, while I'm in this session, or I'm partially present and waving in and out of presence while this person's in a deep experience, or um, whatever the behavior is, it's gonna happen. And I think it's the willingness to to get honest with ourselves about our capacity in that moment, and to be accountable to ourselves, and to have people that we're accountable to, and to let participants, because one of the things I've been hearing a lot is, or I've had a couple of deep conversations with clients that are in space with people where the facilitator is sort of off a little bit, and the person, and going
Hmm.
through their process, is aware of it. And so, how do we create spaces where it's okay? It's a culture of permission for people to say, "Hey, I just need to let you know that that didn't feel good," or "I'm feeling a little bit unsafe. Can we just do this a little bit of it differently?" Um, and that's really subtle and nuanced work, because that means as facilitators we have to create a human enough space to do that. Um, and so, yeah, this is sort of something I feel passionate about, is just the ethics of space holding, the willingness for accountability and subsequent repair, because we're diving into some really deep space with people, and our stuff's going to show up.
Sure
Yeah.
is. Yeah. Have you read Ethics of Caring, Kalia
Yeah,
Taylor?
it was one of the first books I read when I got into the work. So I really appreciate her work. She brings something so relevant and valid, and has. I mean, she's been holding that for decades,
Hmm.
very strongly. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really impressed with her longevity too. Like, what
Hmm.
a trooper. um, and there's a lot of those people in the field, which is great. I, for a little while there weren't so many elders,
I know.
but
Yeah.
over time, elderhood becomes a little more democratized. Is that a fair way to
Hmm.
put it?
I like that. That makes sense to
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Um, yeah. I'm going to try to resist it as long as I can, but I'm sure it'll come eventually.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. Yeah. She even edited the huge green book, right? Of all the inner door articles.
Yeah,
Um,
she did.
yeah. Fascinating.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
man. Okay. So back to
Hmm.
psychedelics versus breathwork.
Hmm.
Kind of a ridiculous talk track, but also really important.
Yeah.
Um, so this idea of one necessarily being superior to the other, that doesn't seem to make sense, but we can say they're different in meaningful ways and
Hmm.
complementary in meaningful ways.
Hmm.
Um, but this embodiment thing, I think, was one of the best parts. Like my impulse as a younger person in my early 20s was to kind of disappear into the ether. I wanted to go higher, and therefore no body was required, right? Breath work didn't really let that get out of control, whereas psychedelics absolutely could. Because I'm always in my body. I don't know. Do you have any kind of thoughts on this kind of embodiment and I don't know, disembodiment that can happen from psychedelics? It's not always. I'm not trying to universalize.
Sure, because I think it can be quite the opposite too. I've had experiences where I actually am, having a very deep experience of embodiment, but the chance of, it's just different. It's different. I feel like, one of the things that the holotropic, well, I think expanded state work in general is this beautiful sort of, Carl Jung talks about the alchemical middle, this space. So like I like to see, this work as being something that is teaching us how to have, as I've said, sort of arms wide enough to hold it all, to really learn how to meet what's happening inside, and to hold the tension of the opposites, and to allow then this like sort of third energy to come through and alchemicalize, the experience. And for me, that posturing was not something I had a template for. It was like, I'll take this experience and that experience, but I can't handle this one, and I was doing a lot of this sort of push pull with certain energies and emotional experiences and thoughts and this whole thing. And when I came into the work, it was like allowing me a space to learn how to hold the tension of all of these things that existed within me. And that when I could hold that, there was this sort of third energy that would come through, that would serve as the alchemy, where it would sort of then propel my arms open a little more each time, to hold a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. So I don't know, that feels relevant to say. And then I think with the breath work, it was just like I appreciate the medicine that the breath is, because right inherent in that, I'm connecting to my body because I'm using my breath. This is an inherent part of my physiology and my bodily functioning, is this system of breathing. And then to know that is the one thing that can propel me into this, vast expansion of existence is just incredibly, again, empowering. And then, I'm also very much a participant in the process. I think with psychedelics, not that this doesn't exist, like you said, I want to universalize it, but like, breath work, you're there. You're very much with the experience, some of the time. It's not to say you can't fly into the ether with the holotropic either. So, I feel like it's really hard, because I've tried over and over again to sort of bypass the embodiment. And there's a part of me that, wanted to stay in the dissonance and still only experience kind of maybe the transpersonal. And, it's like, I imagine like a buffet out, and it was like, okay, I'll take the transpersonal, but only these parts of it, like only this part of the archetypal dimension do I want access to. And, I don't really want to experience the demonic, like that's for those people. And, I don't really want that tetany, and I don't really want to make these sounds, it's like, so it really asks you to just sort of say yes to the whole archetypal pool, to say yes to the whole, all dimensions of our existence as human and transpersonal. And, then you have the body work. So like, people are, the facilitators are there again to follow your own inner wisdom. They're not coming to do something to you. They're coming to support a process that's already happening with the body.
Right. There's no real bodywork program, right?
Yeah. Right. And so inherent in that statement is telling me that, like, well, then, it's really hard to be disembodied in that, because they are following what our body is doing and asking, and essentially also what we're asking for. And so it's a deep meeting of the body. And like you said, like, what does my body need? Like, what is it wanting to do right now? And so there's a listening that happens. a deep listening that happens. Um, and then, the psychedelics, I think it could go either way, right? I mean, sometimes the work is, the medicine like will bring us very much into the body, but I think there's a little bit more of an opportunity, at least in my experience, to sort of stay in the dissonance a little bit. And I do believe that, for a lot of us, that's just part of the journey, and the medicine will bring us home to ourselves eventually. Like we can only get away with that for so long till we sort of get plopped back down into the physical existence and I think this word dissonance keeps coming to me, but it's painful. It's a painful place to be over time. Um, so I think if we keep doing the work, breath work or psychedelics, we are bound to come in contact, with the body. And I think it's really the only way to true healing, to wholeness. It is often the last frontier, but it is one we absolutely have to reach, to meet in order to heal.
There's this thing I've been thinking about generally around psyche, and these like higher conversations around psyche seem more like up there, more like in the
Yeah,
heavens or the
yeah,
realm of the forms or whatever. And the body has been kind of demonized for so long. Like we need to ignore it. We need it to shut
yeah,
up,
yeah.
for sexual and work reasons, whatever other reasons. Like there's so many things we need to shut up in the body, and those things are kind of demonic. So these kind of earth spirits that are more aligned with our
Mm,
body, or whatever that is, however we want to phrase that, those are kind of demonic things and demonic, scary feelings. And it's kind of been part of our pattern for, in some cases, millennia.
yeah. Well, and that makes me think about like, the feminine principle, if you will,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
which has been denied for centuries. I think through this work is sort of, I'll venture to say, forcing her way back again, because you've got to feel, and you've got to feel the slow rhythm, that rhythm of the earth, this sort of very like sort of being in the physical, this bodily experience. And you have to feel that, slowing down, to, to surrender to that. And I think this is really, one of the ways we come home to the body. And it's, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's like the equations are coming back into balance a little bit.
yeah,
And that's kind of how nature operates. Like things go out of balance, and theoretically well, equilibrium will be found,
yeah,
whether we
yeah,
like it or not. So it's better to be engaged with it, I think.
yeah,
Um,
me too.
yeah. Um, hmm. And you mentioned body work. What are your thoughts on body
Hmm.
work not being super present in psychedelic spaces? Body work in the way we think about it in the, Grof
Hmm.
lineage.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know, because I think a lot of that is really contingent on the person's, training and their own sort of experiences with doing that work themselves. I feel like if people are really, really well, I mean, because the body work is, I mean, I don't even like using that word, right? Because we have such a,
It's loaded.
yeah. So I think, Stan called it like focused energy release work, but even that carries, you know, some indication that there's some doing. So I think it can be really powerful when we're with somebody in the space, psychedelic space, and they say, you know, yeah, can you, whatever, however it is that they signal for contact, to be able to do that and to hold this sort of, or to have this holding and knowing that I'm still not doing anything. I'm just sort of supporting this inner healer, this the wisdom that is happening over here. Um, But it's such a tricky line. I mean, if I'm really honest, every time I walk on a breathwork floor, no matter how much I go back into the training and how close I am to my training, I'm gonna mess that up, you know. I'm gonna forget because that's my nature as a human being on this planet. And so my job again is always to just go, well, okay, yeah, let's remember what we're doing here and to surrender and sort of die to that. So I mean, I don't know because touch, I mean, we know this. We know touch is so healing. It's so healing. So much of what is that's created trauma has happened in the relational field, and there's something so relationally supportive about therapeutic and clean touch. Um, but I just think that that takes a tremendous amount of self work.
Agreed. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, my sense is something will be missing, but you're right. Like, really, we need to not universalize it and let people over time figure this out. Um, I believe it will in time become essential.
Hmm.
It's, but even in breathwork, it's not exactly essential, though it's a really nice thing to have in your
Yeah.
toolkit.
Well, isn't this how Stan found it too? It's not like he was like, "Oh, hey, I think I'm gonna go touch someone's body and see if this helps them." I mean, this is never how he worked. He literally just observed and witnessed and listened. And so you know, somebody said, "Hey," maybe this was actually in his LSD work, but it was like, "Hey, can you push on my shoulder? It
Mm-hmm.
hurts." Or like, "Can you push here? Can you do this?" So the participant, the wisdom was it informed him. It wasn't like he was like, "I'm going to create this way of being in the space that seems to make sense to me." He listened. And I can see if we let the medicine inform us, uh, that might be a really beautiful way to come into to new practices, but not because we think it's useful, because the medicine or the inner healer of somebody else's body is saying, "Hey, here's a need, can you meet it?" And if we're listening, I think that could be a really sweet way to honor, um, the healing field.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah, that's like I see so much good and so much like possible harm too. But it's like we always have to be vigilant, right? Those of us with things that we can say from experience should say it. Um, and so like, oh, this could be a really cool avenue of research. Let's go do it. But
Hmm.
here's a few pitfalls I can at least sort of predict, but there's going to be plenty of others here. And so much promise in other areas too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, I think there can be some really, you know, it's interesting because I think when touch is needed or physical contact is needed and it's not met, that there can be harm in that too. So how do we bridge the gap? I don't necessarily know or have an answer to that, but I think if we're willing as people who are saying yes to this, that we can really be informed well. I think plant medicine and I think psychedelics have a way of informing us if we're willing to listen, but
Mm-hmm.
we have to continue to sort of die to ourselves to have, a heart that's open enough to listen and to keep our agenda out of the way. And um, it's tough, I think, in the psychedelic space because people aren't as able to participate in asking for what they need, to some
Mm-hmm.
degree. I mean, it depends, right? But in the breath work, we have a lot of there's some really nice kind of boundaries in place. Like if this doesn't feel right, even if it's exactly what you've asked for, the operative word is stop. And people are able, for the most part, to speak to that. And also, we're listening. Like if the body isn't moving in or meeting what we're doing, we move out. It's not like we stay there and push harder. Uh, so yeah, and I think there can be some things sort of outlined in that way, but it's super tricky. really tricky territory.
Man, before we wrap, die to ourselves. What does that mean to you? You've used it a few times, and I think it's a really great turn of phrase. But I just kind of want to make sure folks understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm, as a human, I come pretty packed with an agenda. And I'm pretty, I have an ego that has a lot of needs. Some, I would venture to say that a lot of them are needs that are serving something in me that, at one point was pretty wounded. So they're not, they're sort of that the attempt to get legitimate needs met illegitimately, perhaps, and that, there's that side of me
Mm-hmm.
that I'm aware of all the time. What am I bringing into the space? What am I bringing into the space? Like, how much of me is not very packed down right now? How much of me is like, how, am I feeling a little like, is there some needs not met around touch for myself? Are there some needs
Mm-hmm.
not met around connection for myself? And to what degree am I bringing this into this space? And I have to be honest with myself about that. It doesn't mean I don't get to be in the space. It just means that I have to be honest. And I think in that moment of self intimacy and self accountability, I have the opportunity to shed something to allow me to be more present. So to me, that's sort of a dying to this egoic need for something to be met. That generally, I mean, the reality is I think we're all walking around with this stuff. I do it all the time. But to die to my agenda, even, my wants and needs, or my intention for what I think needs to happen here. And to let the inner healer of that individual and the collective inner healer that's brought us together to do its work. Mm-hmm. And if I'm in the way of that, I think we all miss a big opportunity. We muddy the water. And so to me, it's like dying to myself. It's just allowing myself to step back and allow the medicine and all of its expression, to work.
Yeah, I think maybe my favorite catchphrase there isn't as sophisticated or as loaded with meaning as what you've said, but I say, like, just, you got to leave all your shit at the door, all your training,
yeah,
almost all of it. I'm just like, there's not, like, you've got to really show up for what they're expressing and needing,
yeah,
versus anything about what's going on in you. Kyle and I have this really, really wild story from a psychedelic conference in Arizona. We ran some really small breathwork sessions, and they're wild. Like, I really don't like running short sessions, but a lot can happen. And something was happening. Somebody was getting very loud, swearing. We thought it was going to be upsetting everybody, interrupting everybody's process. But it wasn't like normal sentence structure. So we just kept talking, like maybe just a little bit longer, like 5 more minutes. Just kept buying time because it was really short. So it didn't take that long, but it worked out great. And we didn't need to intervene. Yeah. It actually added to people's experience in really interesting and helpful ways, I think. And, we didn't then interrupt that person's process. So it's like really, really challenging sometimes, but it's often better to not do anything. And that's challenging as hell if you trained for 4+ years for breath work. Yeah. But it's, it's built into the training to not do that much.
Well, it's, like Tav used to say, really, you're just spending all this money to become fancy pillow throwers, like making sure no one hits their head. Like, that's our job.
Right. That's the number one.
It's the paradox of, like, the facilitator is the most important person in the room and not important at all, and it takes a very deep level of, like, something to be able to hold that paradox. I'm important and I'm not important at all. Like you said earlier, doing, not doing. And these are deep, potent paradoxes that live inside of us as facilitators of expanded state work. And to me, the only way to stay centered in that and to sit right in the middle is to continue to do my own work and let people hold space for me, so I can remember what that feels like. Yeah.
Right. Being engaged in the process, reflecting on how other people are making you feel in your process. And yeah, well, not to mention how healing community is generally.
Yeah, of course.
So important. Well, I don't know if we hit everything we needed to hit for you, but anything else we want to mention or point people towards?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's coming to mind right now, Joe. I just want to say that I'm really grateful for what you're doing, and I'm so grateful for holotropic breathwork and my teachers in the work, and Tab Sparks, who passed last year. So just to give a deep, heartful shout out to him and what he's brought, and of course to Stan and Christina Grof, who so beautifully birthed this work into being, and we're really getting to see it. I mean, be utilized in some really important spaces, and so just a really deep bow to them for trusting it, for being willing to continue to listen, and I'll use that statement again, die to themselves over and over again to allow this to be what it is and to have the integrity it has. Yeah.
Beautiful. And where can people find your work or find out about any kind of breathwork workshops you're hosting?
Yeah, so right now I'm using some pretty simple means to do that. I'm in some transition with a website, so I have workshops in Austin and Portland, and they can do so through meetup.com is a good way to find them, and then also Facebook, so Holotropic Austin in particular, and then also through the GTT website, so holotropic.com is also a way to get in touch with me. Yeah.
Christine Calvert, this has been amazing. Kind of cartoonish. It took us so long to get together here, but I'm really grateful for your time and for you being on the show. And I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Joe.